The gunshots echoed across the canyon walls like thunder, sending ravens scattering into the cloudless Arizona sky. Jackson Hawkins crouched behind a sun-bleached boulder, the smell of gunpowder sharp in his nostrils. His weathered hand reached for the Colt's single-action army at his hip, the revolver that had kept him breathing through 15 years of frontier justice. Two bodies already lay sprawled in the rust-colored dirt 20 yards back. In this wild country, he whispered to himself, chambering another round, a man can only trust two things, his Colt peacemaker and his survival instincts. The last outlaw's desperate shots kicked up dust near Jackson's boots. Amateur, wasting ammunition instead of waiting for a clear target. Jackson inhaled deeply, counted 3 heartbeats, then rose smoothly to his full 6'2" frame. His arm extended in one fluid motion. The Colt bucked once in his calloused palm. The outlaw dropped without a sound, his Winchester rifle clattering against stone. Silence returned to the canyon, just the wind and the distant cry of a hunting hawk. Jackson holstered his weapon and stepped cautiously from cover, scanning the horizon with eyes narrowed against the merciless sun. That's when he saw her, a woman staked out on the desert floor like a sacrifice, her dress torn and dirty, her skin already blistering under the Arizona sun. He approached cautiously, his spurs jingling with each step. She was young, maybe 28, with dark hair matted to her forehead. Her wrists and ankles were bound to iron stakes driven deep into the hard-packed earth. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, but her eyes, when they fluttered open in his approach, burned with surprising defiance. "Water," she croaked. Jackson uncorked his canteen and knelt beside her, lifting her head gently to let her drink. She gulped desperately, water spilling down her chin. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice low and graveled from years of dust and whiskey. "Redemption's justice," she managed, her voice barely audible. 3 days under the sun. Live, and you're innocent. Die, and you're guilty." Jackson's jaw tightened. He'd heard of such practices in the more remote settlements, barbaric traditions from another time, preserved like fossils in the isolation of the frontier. "What's your crime?" he asked, already reaching for the Arkansas toothpick blade strapped to his calf. "They say I stole gold from the town vault." She coughed weakly. "I didn't." Jackson studied her face for lies. He'd seen enough men hang for their crimes to recognize guilt in a person's eyes. Hers held only pain and rage. "The real gold," she whispered, her eyes darting to ensure they were alone, "is hidden in Bear Canyon, Hargrove's secret mine. Help me, and half is yours." Jackson froze. Emmett Hargrove, the name was known throughout the territory. Former Confederate officer turned mining magnate and mayor of Redemption. A man whose wealth was matched only by his cruelty. "Your name?" Jackson asked, testing the sharpness of his blade against his thumb. "Sarah Collins." The first rope parted under his knife like rotten string. "I'm Jackson Hawkins, the cavalry scout. From the war?" Her eyes widened slightly. That was a lifetime ago. He was slicing through the second rope when he heard horses approaching. 2 riders topped the ridge, wearing deputy badges that caught the sun like signal mirrors. "Hey, stop right there!" one shouted, reaching for his sidearm. Jackson's hand moved with practiced efficiency. The Colt cleared leather and fired before the deputy's gun was halfway drawn. The man toppled from his saddle, a red stain blossoming across his chest. The second deputy managed to fire once, the bullet singing past Jackson's ear, before Jackson's second shot caught him in the throat. Sarah gasped as Jackson cut through her remaining bindings. "They'll kill you for this." "They'll try," he muttered, helping her to her feet. Her legs buckled immediately. Without hesitation, Jackson lifted her onto his Appaloosa stallion, then mounted behind her. The horse, a veteran of many hasty departures, needed no encouragement to break into a gallop. "Hargrove has 50 men," Sarah warned as they rode. "He'll put a price on our heads." "Wouldn't be the first time," Jackson replied grimly. The sun was already sinking toward the western mountains when they reached Frontier Station, little more than a weathered trading post and stagecoach stop on the edge of Apache territory. Jackson had fought alongside the owner during the war, and if there was one man he still trusted in this God-forsaken territory, it was Frank Tillman. Frank stood on the porch as they approached, a Spencer repeating rifle cradled casually in his arms. At 60, his beard had gone white, but his eyes remained sharp as a hawk's. "Trouble follows you like a shadow, Hawkins," Frank called out, lowering his weapon as he recognized the rider. "Need a place to lay low," Jackson replied, helping Sarah down from the saddle. "And information." Frank's eyebrows rose at the sight of Sarah's condition, but he asked no questions as he ushered them inside. The trading post was empty except for a young Apache boy sweeping the wooden floor. Frank nodded to him, and the boy slipped out the back door without a word. "Word travels fast in these parts," Frank said, pouring 3 glasses of whiskey. "Emmett Hargrove's already offering $500 for both of you, dead or alive." Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted the drink. "He'll send Cole Blackwood after us." Jackson's expression darkened. "The bounty hunter?" "Hargrove's personal executioner," Sarah confirmed. "He killed my father and brothers when they discovered the secret mine." Frank leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There have been rumors about a hidden gold deposit that Hargrove's been working. Land that rightfully belonged to settlers he drove off or killed." "Not rumors," Sarah insisted, her voice strengthening. "My father was a doctor, but he knew mining. He found evidence of Hargrove's fake land claims and forged deeds. That's why they killed him and framed me." A floorboard creaked outside. Frank's hand moved toward his belt. Jackson was already on his feet, Colt drawn, when the door burst open. Cole Blackwood stood framed in the doorway, a sawed-off shotgun in his hands and 4 hard-faced men behind him. He was a mountain of a man with a face bisected by a jagged scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Jackson Hawkins," he drawled, his voice surprisingly soft for such a large man. "And the Collins girl. 2 birds with 1 stone." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Frank overturned the heavy oak table as a shield. Jackson fired twice, dropping the men flanking Blackwood. The shotgun roared, splintering wood where Jackson had stood a heartbeat before. Sarah scrambled behind the bar as Blackwood's remaining men opened fire. Jackson and Frank moved like the soldiers they once were, firing in coordinated bursts, using hand signals developed during the war. In 30 seconds, it was over. Blackwood and his men lay dead or dying on the blood-slick floorboards. "Carson City," Frank said, binding a flesh wound on his arm. "Marshal Reynolds is stationed there. If anyone can help you legally, it's him. We'll need horses." "And supplies," Jackson replied, reloading his Colt with mechanical precision. "And to avoid the main trail," Sarah added, "Hargrove has men watching all of them." Frank nodded grimly. "Then you'll need to cut through Apache territory. No white man's been through there in years." "No white man who wasn't a scout," Jackson corrected, a plan already forming in his mind. Outside, the sun had set completely. Darkness would provide cover, but by dawn, every hired gun and bounty hunter in the territory would be looking for them. The odds were impossible, just how Jackson liked them. Dawn broke over the jagged peaks of Apache territory, painting the sandstone cliffs blood red. Jackson led the way on foot, guiding his Appaloosa by the reins. Sarah followed on a paint mare Frank had provided, her strength returning after a night's rest. Neither had spoken much since leaving Frontier Station. Words were luxury in country where sound carried for miles. Jackson moved with the instinctive caution of a man who had spent years behind enemy lines during the war. Every ridge was a potential ambush point. Every shadow might hide a shooter. His eyes constantly scanned their back trail for dust clouds that would signal pursuit. "We need water soon," he finally said, pointing to a distant cluster of cottonwoods. "Those trees mean a spring or a creek." Sarah studied his profile against the rising sun. You've done this before. Running. Not running, he corrected sharply. Surviving. There's a difference. At the spring, Jackson demonstrated how to check for rattlesnakes before approaching the water. They hunt at dawn and dusk. Always look for coiled shapes in the shadows. He showed her how to filter water through a bandana, how to identify edible plants, how to erase their tracks when crossing rock. Sarah proved a quick study, watching his every move with intelligent eyes. Your husband teach you medicine? Jackson asked as she expertly dressed a small cut on his hand using herbs she'd gathered. My father, she corrected. I was his assistant before Hargrove had him killed for discovering the truth. Jackson nodded, unsurprised. My wife and boy were killed 5 years ago. Apache raid on our homestead. At least that's what it was made to look like. Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. You think Hargrove? I had good land. Never thought about what might be under it. His voice was flat, emotionless. Moved on. Bought a small horse ranch near the territorial border. Until today, I minded my own business. They made camp in a sheltered canyon as the sun began to set. Jackson was gathering firewood when he heard it, the distinctive click of a rifle hammer being cocked. He dropped flat as the shot cracked across the canyon. The bullet shattered bark where his head had been moments before. Ambush! He shouted to Sarah. Get down! Gunfire erupted from 3 directions. Blackwood's men had found them. Jackson crawled to his saddlebag, retrieving his Winchester .73. The familiar weight of the rifle steadied his racing heart. He spotted movement on the ridge, a shooter adjusting position, and squeezed the trigger. The man tumbled down the slope like a broken doll. I count 5 more, he called to Sarah, who had taken cover behind a boulder. His spare Remington revolver clutched in her hands. 6, she corrected, firing at a shadow moving through the scrub brush. There's one trying to flank us from the east. Jackson allowed himself a grim smile. The doctor's daughter had good eyes. For 10 minutes, the canyon echoed with gunfire. Jackson used every trick he'd learned as a scout, firing from different positions, using terrain for cover, conserving ammunition with precise shots. They had dropped 4 attackers when a bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him against the canyon wall. Sarah was at his side instantly, tearing strips from her petticoat to staunch the bleeding. We need to move. They'll rush us once they realize you're hit. Jackson gritted his teeth against the pain. Too many. You go. I'll hold them off. Her eyes flashed with anger. My father didn't raise a coward, Mr. Hawkins. Neither did yours, I expect. Before Jackson could respond, war cries echoed through the canyon. Arrows whistled through the air, finding targets among the remaining ambushers. Painted warriors materialized from the rocks like ghosts, moving with terrifying speed. The surviving attackers turned their guns on this new threat, but they were too late. Within moments, the canyon fell silent again, save for the moans of the wounded and dying. A tall Apache warrior approached, his face streaked with black and red paint. Jackson recognized him immediately. Gray Wolf, war chief of the Shadow Mountain Band. They had met years ago when Jackson had been tasked with negotiating safe passage for Army supply wagons. The man who speaks truth, Gray Wolf greeted him in halting English. Many winters since we meet. Gray Wolf, Jackson acknowledged, wincing as he stood. I'm in your debt. The chief's dark eyes moved to Sarah, then back to Jackson. White man's bullets follow you. Why? Jackson explained their situation in simple terms. The corrupt mayor, the hidden gold mine, the murder of Sarah's family. Gray Wolf listened impassively, then nodded once. Hargrove, he spat the name. His men kill my people too, for land that is not his to take. That night in the Apache camp, Sarah tended Jackson's wound while Gray Wolf explained how Hargrove's men had attacked an Apache settlement, slaughtering women and children to secure land for mining operations. The territorial governor, in Hargrove's pocket, had dismissed the massacre as a necessary security action. "We share enemy," Grey Wolf concluded. "We help you reach white man's justice in Carson City, through mountains. Secret path." Jackson studied the tribal elder's weathered face. "Why trust us?" Grey Wolf smiled thinly. "You spare my son when your soldiers find him scouting. Life debt is not forgotten." 3 days later, they reached Carson City, a growing settlement that served as the regional headquarters for the federal marshals. Jackson's wound had begun to heal thanks to Sarah's care and Apache medicine. They parted ways with Grey Wolf's warriors at the edge of town, promising to return with justice. Marshal Daniel Reynolds was waiting in his office when they arrived. A tall, grim-faced man with a silver star on his chest and eyes that had seen too much death. He and Jackson had served in the same cavalry unit during the war. "Hawkins," he greeted, rising from behind his desk. "Heard you were dead." "Not for lack of trying," Jackson replied, clasping his old comrade's hand. The marshal's expression darkened as they explained the situation. "Hargrove has friends in high places. Senator Wilson owes him for campaign contributions. Judge Holbrook is his brother-in-law." "We have evidence," Sarah insisted. "Documents my father collected, forged deeds, false mining claims, all locked in Hargrove's office safe." Reynolds sighed. "Without that evidence, I can't officially help you. My hands are tied." "Then we'll get it ourselves," Jackson stated. That night, they pored over maps of redemption, while Reynolds provided details about Hargrove's office, guard rotations, and the Chubb safe that held the evidence. "It's a newer model," the marshal explained, "but any man who spent time behind Confederate lines should know how to crack it." Jackson nodded. During the war, he'd learned safe cracking from a Union engineer, skills that had proven invaluable for accessing Confederate battle plans. "Once we have the evidence," Sarah asked, "then what?" "Then," Reynolds said, "I can bring the full weight of federal law down on Hargrove." They set out for redemption the following night. The plan was simple. Jackson would break into Hargrove's office while Sarah kept watch. Reynolds would remain in Carson City, maintaining plausible deniability until they returned with evidence. The town was quiet when they arrived, most windows dark except for the saloon. Jackson moved like a shadow through the back alleys, Sarah close behind. Hargrove's office stood at the end of the main street, a two-story building with a balcony overlooking the town square. "2 guards at the front door," Sarah whispered. "Another probably inside." Jackson nodded. "Wait here. If you hear shooting, ride for Carson City." He circled around to the back of the building, finding a drainage pipe that provided access to the second-floor balcony. Years of ranch work and horse breaking had kept his arms strong despite his 42 years. He scaled the pipe silently, then slipped over the balcony railing. The office door was locked, a simple tumbler mechanism that surrendered to his lockpicks in seconds. Inside, the office was dark and silent. Moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating a massive desk and the safe behind it. Jackson worked quickly, pressing his ear against the cold metal of the safe as he manipulated the dial. Each tiny click brought him closer to the combination. Minutes stretched like hours before the final tumbler fell into place. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. Inside, he found exactly what they needed: ledgers recording illegal transactions, forged deeds to mining claims, and records of payoffs to territorial officials. But beneath these, something unexpected: a federal wanted poster with a familiar face. Emmett Hargrove was really William Hollister, wanted for murder and theft in 3 territories. Jackson was photographing the documents with the small camera Reynolds had provided when he heard the floorboard creak behind him. He spun, reaching for his Colt, but too late. The guard's rifle butt crashed against his temple, sending him sprawling across the desk. Through blurred vision, he saw the guard raising his rifle for a killing shot. Jackson rolled, sweeping an oil lamp from the desk. It shattered against the guard's chest, flames erupting instantly. The man's screams brought more guards running as Jackson gathered the evidence and dove through the office window, landing hard on the awning below. Gunfire erupted as he sprinted through the alley. A bullet grazed his side, but adrenaline carried him forward. Sarah was waiting with the horses, already mounted and ready. "Go!" he shouted, vaulting into the saddle despite the pain lancing through his shoulder and side. They galloped out of town, bullets kicking up dust around them. Behind them, an alarm bell began to clang, rousing the town. Dawn found them halfway to Carson City, their horses lathered and exhausted. Jackson's wounds had reopened, blood seeping through his shirt. "We need to rest," Sarah insisted, helping him dismount. As she cleaned his wounds, Jackson showed her what he'd discovered. Hargrove isn't just corrupt. He's a wanted man hiding behind a false identity. Sarah's eyes widened as she studied the wanted poster. This changes everything. They reached Carson City by noon, expecting to find Reynolds waiting. Instead, they found a trap. Deputies surrounded the marshal's office, guns drawn. And standing on the boardwalk, a satisfied smile on his face, was Marshal Daniel Reynolds himself. "I'm sorry, old friend," Reynolds called out, his voice carrying across the dusty street. "Hargrove's reach is longer than you thought. $5,000 buys a lot of loyalty these days." Jackson's hand hovered near his holster. "I thought we fought for something better, Daniel." "We lost that war, Jackson," Reynolds replied coldly. "I'm just being practical." What happened next would later be recounted in saloons across the territory. Jackson's draw was a blur. 2 shots that dropped the deputies flanking Reynolds before they could pull their triggers. A third bullet knocked Reynolds' gun from his hand, but they were outnumbered 10-1. A deputy's bullet caught Jackson in the leg as he and Sarah fought their way to the stables. They barely escaped, riding hard for the mountains with a posse in pursuit. Night found them huddled in a cave, Jackson fighting fever from his wounds. Sarah used the last of their medical supplies to treat him, her face tight with worry. "We can't go back to Carson City," she said, "and Hargrove will have men watching all the trails to larger settlements." Jackson nodded weakly. "Then we go back to Redemption. End this where it started." "That's suicide," Sarah protested. Jackson's hand closed around hers. "Not alone. We have allies." In his delirium, a plan began to form, one that would require every friend and favor he had left in this world. The mineshaft elevator descended into darkness, its ancient cables groaning under the weight of 20 armed men. Jackson stood at the front, his Winchester cradled in his arms, his face illuminated by the flickering lantern light. Behind him stood Frank Tillman and a dozen former Union soldiers, men who had once fought under Jackson's command and had answered his call one final time. Mixed among them were Apache warriors led by Gray Wolf, their faces painted for war, their presence a testament to the unusual alliance forged in blood and shared purpose. At the rear stood Sarah, a bandolier of ammunition across her chest and determination hardening her features. 2 weeks had passed since their escape from Carson City. 2 weeks of preparation, of gathering allies, of planning the assault that would bring Hargrove's empire crumbling down. "Remember," Jackson addressed the group as the elevator shuddered to a halt. "Hargrove's men outnumber us 3-1. We have surprise and righteous fury on our side. That will have to be enough." They moved through the abandoned lower level of the mine, a secret passage that connected to Hargrove's private mine, discovered thanks to maps provided by miners sympathetic to their cause. Men who had lost friends and family to Hargrove's greed. The plan was simple but dangerous. While the Apache warriors created a diversion at the town's eastern edge, Jackson's force would emerge from the mine into Hargrove's private office. They would capture the mayor and secure the evidence needed to bring federal authorities, the real ones this time, down on the corrupt empire. The passage ended at a solid wooden door. Jackson pressed his ear against it, hearing muffled voices on the other side. He held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. The door burst open under Frank's shoulder. Jackson swept into the room, his Winchester already firing. Two of Hargrove's guards fell before they could draw their weapons. The third managed to fire a wild shot that shattered a lamp before Grey Wolf's tomahawk found his chest. "Secure the building," Jackson ordered. Half the men spread out, taking control of the upper and lower floors of Hargrove's headquarters. But the mayor himself was nowhere to be found. "The alarm's been raised," Frank reported, peering through the window blinds. "Hargrove's men are gathering in the street." Outside, gunfire erupted from the eastern edge of town, Grey Wolf's diversion working perfectly. Jackson moved to the wall safe, now exposed behind a sliding panel. Within minutes, he had it open, retrieving additional documents that would seal Hargrove's fate. "Jackson," Sarah called from the window, "Blackwood is leading men this way." The bounty hunter had survived their previous encounter, it seemed, and he had brought at least 30 armed men with him. "Defensive positions," Jackson commanded. "Frank, get those documents to the Apache camp outside town. Sarah, go with him." She shook her head firmly. "I've come too far to run now." The first assault came minutes later, a frontal attack met with devastating rifle fire from Jackson's veterans. 8 of Blackwood's men fell in the first volley, the rest retreating to the cover of nearby buildings. "They'll try to burn us out next," Jackson predicted grimly. He was right. Flaming arrows arced toward the building's wooden shingles. The defenders rushed to extinguish them, but it was a losing battle. Smoke began to fill the lower floors. "We need to move," Frank urged. "We're trapped if we stay." Jackson nodded. "The church tower. We can hold them off from there until the federal marshals arrive." They made a fighting retreat through the smoky building, emerging onto the street in a hail of gunfire. 3 of Jackson's men fell immediately. The survivors returned fire as they sprinted toward the white-steepled church at the end of the street. Jackson was halfway there when he spotted Cole Blackwood stepping into the street, dual Remingtons drawn. The bounty hunter fired, the bullet tearing through Jackson's side. Jackson staggered but remained upright, turning to face his attacker. Time seemed to slow as they faced each other across 30 feet of dusty street, a scene from 1,000 frontier legends. Blackwood fired again. Jackson felt the bullet pass through his already wounded shoulder, but his own Colt was rising, steady despite the pain. 6 shots rang out in rapid succession. Blackwood jerked with each impact, his expression shifting from confidence to disbelief. He toppled backward into the dirt, his unfired second Remington still clutched in his lifeless hand. Jackson stumbled toward the church, blood trailing behind him. Sarah appeared at his side, supporting him as they reached the sanctuary. The remaining defenders barricaded the doors behind them. "The tower," Jackson gasped, fighting to stay conscious. From the church tower, they had a commanding view of the town. Frank organized the defense while Sarah tended Jackson's wounds. "The marshals should be here by now," she said, her voice tight with worry. Jackson forced himself to his feet, moving to the window. What he saw below froze his blood. Emmett Hargrove stood in the street, surrounded by armed men, and beside him, bound and on his knees, was Grey Wolf. "Hawkins!" Hargrove shouted, his voice carrying to the tower. "Surrender now, or the savage dies first. Then everyone in that church with you." Jackson's mind raced, calculating angles, distances, the number of rounds remaining. There had to be a way out. "You've lost either way, Hargrove," he called back. "The evidence is already on its way to territorial headquarters." "Evidence can burn," Hargrove replied with chilling confidence. "Men can die. I've rebuilt before. I'll rebuild again." He pressed a revolver against Grey Wolf's head. "1 minute, Hawkins, then I start the killing." Sarah's hand found Jackson's. "What do we do?" A strange calm settled over Jackson as the solution presented itself. "Cover me," he said simply. Before anyone could stop him, he threw open the tower door and stepped onto the narrow wooden balcony that encircled the steeple. "Hargrove!" he shouted, his voice ringing across the town square. "This is between you and me. Let's end it like men." The mayor looked up, squinting against the sun. A slow smile spread across his face. "The famous scout wants a showdown? How poetic!" "One condition," Jackson continued. "Win or lose, your quarrel is with me. These people walk free." Hargrove considered for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed, though it won't matter to you either way." Jackson descended the tower stairs slowly, each step sending fire through his wounded body. Sarah clutched his arm at the church door. "You can barely stand," she whispered urgently. "This is suicide." "Maybe," he acknowledged, "but sometimes one man's sacrifice is the price of justice." He pressed the federal marshal's badge Reynolds had given him years ago into her palm. "If I fall, show this to the territorial governor. Make him listen." The street had emptied except for Hargrove, who stood 30 paces away, his black frock coat flapping in the hot wind. Gray Wolf had been dragged to the sidelines, still on his knees but watching with intense focus. "I've been waiting for this, Hawkins," Hargrove called, his hand hovering near his holstered Schofield revolver. "Ever since you started asking questions about that homestead of yours." Jackson froze. "What did you say?" Hargrove laughed coldly. "You think those Apache attacked your farm by chance? That land sits atop the richest vein in the territory. Your wife and boy were simply obstacles to progress." White-hot rage flooded through Jackson, burning away pain and fatigue. "You ordered it," he said flatly, not a question. "Business is business," Hargrove replied with a shrug. "Nothing personal." Jackson's hand hovered near his Colt. 5 years of grief crystallized into a single moment of clarity. "Draw," he said softly. Hargrove's hand flashed downward. His Schofield cleared leather a split second before Jackson's Colt, but his shot went wild. Jackson fired twice with the precision that had kept him alive through war and wilderness. The first bullet shattered Hargrove's right knee. The second punched through his shooting arm, sending the Schofield spinning into the dust. The mare collapsed, screaming in agony. Jackson approached slowly, his Colt trained on Hargrove's head. One more bullet would end it. Justice for his family, for Sarah's father, for countless others who had suffered under Hargrove's reign. "Do it," Hargrove hissed through clenched teeth. "Prove you're no better than me." Jackson's finger tightened on the trigger. Then with visible effort, he lowered the gun. "No," he said quietly. "You don't get to turn me into a murderer. You'll hang according to the law." As if summoned by his words, a column of dust appeared on the horizon, riders approaching fast, the sun glinting off federal badges. The real marshals had finally arrived. In the weeks that followed, redemption began to live up to its name. William Hollister, alias Emmett Hargrove, was tried and sentenced to hang for multiple counts of murder, fraud, and corruption. The infamous Son Law was abolished forever. Sarah Collins reclaimed her father's property and the legitimate mining rights that came with it. The Apache were granted formal recognition of their territorial boundaries. Small justice for past atrocities, but a beginning. On a crisp autumn morning, Jackson stood on the porch of the marshal's office, a silver star pinned to his chest. The territorial governor himself had offered him the position of town marshal. After much consideration, he had accepted. Some wounds would never fully heal, the loss of his family chief among them. But in bringing justice to redemption, he had found purpose again, and perhaps in time, peace. Sarah approached, a folded paper in her hand. "Reports of an illegal railroad survey team crossing Apache land to the north," she said, "and rumors of the Dalton gang heading this way." Jackson nodded, his hand resting comfortably on his Colt. "Trouble never ends in these parts." "Will you handle it?" she asked, a hint of a smile touching her lips. He gazed out at the town, his town now, with its promise of a better future built on hard-won justice. "I reckon I will," he said simply, "one day at a time. But that, as they say, is a story for another day."